Mina Malik Hussain, this is the coffee table. Did you know that the 21st of March, which is the 21st day of the third month for a very particular reason, more on that later, but the 21st of March is World Down Syndrome Day. And today I'm so excited to be welcoming on the show two wonderful people who are staunch advocates for Down syndrome in Pakistan and whose organizations have been doing invaluable awareness and support work for people with Down syndrome and their families and are just stalwarts in their field. I'm so excited to be welcoming today Farzeen Ali, who is the co-founder and director of the Karachi Down Syndrome Program, and Abid Lashari, who is the president of the Pakistan Down Syndrome Association, which is a national level DPO, which is also a member of Down Syndrome International, which is of course an international Down syndrome body. And Mr. Lashari is also the president of the National Disability and Development Forum. Welcome to the show, both of you. This is so wonderful. So Farzeen, can you tell me why particularly the 21st day of the third month was chosen for World Down Syndrome Day?
Great. Hi, thanks for having me. So the 21st of March is significant, like how you said, it's the 21st March of the third month.
Yeah.
So Trisomy 21 is another name for Down syndrome. And what that actually means is that so in every cell of the human body, there are 46 pairs of chromosomes, basically 23 pairs of chromosomes. And when Down syndrome occurs, the 21st pair of chromosome has 3 copies instead of its 2 copies, which is why it's called Trisomy 21. And I suppose there's no better day in the year than 21st of March to represent that day and the people who are born with that extra chromosome, which is why it's called International World Down Syndrome Day.
Yeah. No, it's really lovely actually, and I love that kind of thought went into choosing that day. So, Farzeen, when we talk about Down syndrome, I think that a lot of people are fairly familiar with it, but could you sort of just tell us a little bit about what does it mean to have Down syndrome? So clearly there is this, one has an extra chromosome. So, but how does that manifest?
Right. So I think it's very important to start off with realizing that Down syndrome is not in any way a disease or an illness. It's a condition. It's a condition that a person is born with.
Yes.
It manifests itself in ways both physically and intellectually. So if we're talking about physical, so, a person with Down syndrome can have lower muscle tone than typical people, which basically means that they require more effort. They're required to do more effort in doing simple day-to-day things. So like a child with Down syndrome will probably learn to walk later or probably learn to crawl later than a typical child. Physically also, they would, if we're looking at the medical side of things, then 50% of children with Down syndrome have some sort of cardiac issue. They have some sort of congenital heart defect, which needs to be addressed earlier on. 70% have some sort of hearing issue or some vision issue. And then on the intellectual side of things, people with Down syndrome can have, mild to moderate intellectual disability.
Right.
But I also want to emphasize that this does not, yes, there would be differences, but that does not reflect in any way the potential and capability of people with Down syndrome. So that's a very important point too. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we're going to sort of sack to that in just a minute. But Abid, hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, welcome to the show. It's so nice to have you here. So Abid, tell me, like Farzeen said, Down syndrome is not a disease, but it's something that you're born with. So does that mean that, does it run in families or it can happen to anybody?
If in any family there is any one child with Down syndrome, maybe possible for the second one. But in our Pakistan, we have some kind of tests that we can find that other baby is with Down syndrome or not. We can check, get the information. But it's not mandatory that the second child will be also with the Down syndrome condition, as we have the thalassemia condition.
Yes.
Okay. But we cannot advise any kind of a prevention in this regard, because this is the trisomy, and anytime it can be occur, and the child, baby is there. So it's from Almighty Allah. But when after the birth, we need to understand first of all, we should accept the disability condition.
Yes.
Parents do not accept the condition of disability, but they only rely on the treatments and the medical side.
Yes.
Because the disability has no any kind of a treatment, because this is not a disease.
Yes,
there is a huge difference of disease and disability.
Yes.
So first of all, parents should accept this kind of disability, then they should go for the rehabilitation of their child. The children with Down syndrome are not the children with intellectual disability.
Yes.
They have the good development, and they can be mainstreamed in our society if we have the continued service of rehabilitation.
Yes.
In Nawabshah, this is a little town and at a district level, and it's 300 kilometers away from Karachi.
Yes.
We have the facilities like psychotherapy, speech therapy, and occupational therapies are available in Karachi, but you will not find in other districts of same.
Yes.
So we have established one facility in our Nawabshah to support the person with Down syndrome living in the rural areas.
Absolutely.
We call these children as a Chani bacha, and we call them a darvesh, Allah lok. So we do not have information about the Down syndrome. And I will also add here that doctors can diagnose this kind of disability and what kind of Down syndrome is there.
Yes,
but in our rural area, at district level, doctors are also not aware about the Down syndrome. What is the condition?
That's very important.
How to deal this kind of condition as well.
I want to talk.
The dire need.
Yes, I absolutely agree. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more in detail about that also. But and I'm really glad that you brought up how diagnoses are made. So Farzeen, from what I understand, there is more than one kind of Down syndrome also. So there are 3 different kinds.
All right. So there's the trisomy. There's trisomy 21, which means there are 3 copies of the 21st chromosome, like we had discussed earlier. Then there's also another type. So trisomy 21 occurs in about 98% of all cases with Down syndrome, right? And that's a random genetic mutation, which means that it is not hereditary. So most of the people out there who have Down syndrome, it was a random occurrence, right? Then there is translocational, which has a slight genetic hereditary component to it. And uskandar, if we look at it from a very medical perspective, so there is an extra copy of the 21st chromosome, but it's attached to another pair of the chromosome inside the cell. And then there's mosaicism, in which not every cell in the body has 3 copies of chromosome 21, the extra chromosome, only some of them. Some of the cells do. Those are the 3 types.
Right. So does that mean that there is a spectrum for Down syndrome, or because trisomy 21 is the most prevalent one, then that's the one that most people have, so then that's just what we focus on?
Right. So somebody who has trisomy 21 and somebody who has translocation Down syndrome, their spectrum, or mosaicism, Down syndrome has a spectrum in and of itself. Okay. So it doesn't matter whether if you have trisomy 21 or if you have mosaicism, you will be on, the person with Down syndrome will be on the higher side of, or the lower side of intellectual disability or whatever. So Down syndrome has a spectrum as in and of itself.
Oh, okay. Well, that's also really interesting to know. Abid mentioned that a lot of doctors are able to diagnose Down syndrome, and a lot of doctors aren't aware of that. And I'm sure that depends on where those doctors are situated. But ordinarily, typically, how does a diagnosis of Down syndrome, how is that made?
Right. So when a baby is born, it can have certain physical characteristics that can indicate that he or she might have Down syndrome. So physically, they might have, like I mentioned, loose muscle tone. They might have a crease on their palm, like a single crease across their palm. They might have upward slanted eyes that indicate that, there might be Down syndrome there. But 100% diagnosis is made after a blood test is done. It's called the karyotype blood test. So a baby would have to have that blood test done to determine whether they have that extra chromosome in their cells.
But then also one can screen for it while babies are in utero as well. And I believe that one of one's initial ultrasounds, the sort of first trimester one, they are looking for things like fluid around the neck, for example.
That's right. So that's called an NT, nuchal translucency ultrasound. That's done around the 12th, 13th week mark.
Yeah.
Yes, you can find out. So there are indications in that ultrasound which can kind of point out. But then further ahead in the pregnancy, there's something called a triple test. So basically, that's a blood test combined with an ultrasound, combined with the mother's age. It can give you around like a 70% accuracy of whether the baby would have Down syndrome. So that's basically something of the past now. Now what we have, I think since 2011 or 2013, I can't remember the year, we have a simple blood test in which a pregnant woman can find out whether their child has Down syndrome, her child has Down syndrome with around 98% accuracy. So it's non-invasive, it's just a blood test. So yeah, as early as 9 weeks in the pregnancy, you can tell whether your child has Down syndrome or not. So that has significantly changed the debate of how, there's a huge ethical dilemma in this, right? Because the earlier you find out, the easier it is to abort the baby.
Yes.
So there's a huge, conversation that's been ongoing for the past few years on, how far do we go in kind of screening, for these kind of abnormalities or, conditions. Yeah. So why? Because people usually,
Yes.
So I'll give you the case of Iceland, for example. So as a country, it's pretty much close to eliminating its Down syndrome population because these tests are offered to every single woman who is pregnant. And I think the rate of abortion is 98%, if I'm not mistaken. Wow. So if the test comes out positive, 98% of the women choose to abort the fetus. So basically, Iceland has a nearly negligible population of people with Down syndrome. And then you kind of start questioning, okay, what kind of a society do we want to live in where there are no differences, right? And there's no diversity.
Absolutely.
So that's a whole other debate yeah.
And that a great deal of that probably also rests on the fact that if there is more support and there's more awareness and there's more of a conversation about life with Down syndrome and a realization that you can have a fulfilling, rich life even with a condition like this, then you can do it. And maybe parents would feel less pressured or less afraid to go down that path. We're going to take a very quick break at this crucial juncture. Stay with us. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to the coffee table. We're having a wonderful conversation about Down syndrome and unpacking what it means, how does it happen, and then how do we live with that with Farzeen Ali from the Karachi Down Syndrome Program and Abid Lashari, who is the president of the Pakistan Down Syndrome Association. Now, Abid, you work in Nawab Shah on a district level with a lot of parents who aren't familiar with Down syndrome. And like you said, a lot of doctors, and because of the facilities there, a lot of doctors aren't aware of the syndrome themselves. So how does the PDSA help families to understand Down syndrome and the kind of help that their children need then?
Okay. We started our work from Nawab Shah. Yes. Still we are working there, but we have also main office in Karachi. our organization is working since 2009,
Yes.
and we are the only organization which registered with the Down Syndrome International DSI.
Very good.
So in 2012, this day, 21st day, was announced by the UN
Yes.
that every year this day will be observed. In 2012, we also observed the first day in Pakistan. In
How was
rural
the
area,
response?
the response, it was a very new thing, and no one was understanding about the Down syndrome.
Yes.
And we have no any word in Urdu as well.
Yes,
In Urdu, we
that's
also
true.
call it Down syndrome.
Okay.
People say it's down. Down means they don't have a kind of abilities like this one, but they don't know the Down is the name of the person.
Yes.
So we also shared our press releases through the seminars. We organize seminars in Nawabshah as well and Karachi as well to
Yes.
make aware the community about
Yes.
What is Down and what is the Down syndrome, how this condition can be treated in our advocacy campaign.
Yes.
So in various TV channels also they promoted our cause, and now since 2012 we have 9 years that in Pakistan it is realized that Down syndrome is the condition. It's
Yes.
not down of that down, but this is the name of the person who
Yes.
who was the first person who
Yes.
diagnosed this kind of syndrome. And people are realized that their children are not part of intellectual
Yes.
disability, and they have the progressive condition rather than the intellectual disability.
Absolutely,
And
yes.
now it is proved that Down syndrome persons or children are contributing in the world. In
Absolutely.
Pakistan as well, if we have the continued services for these children, for the rehabilitation services, these children can speak, they can easily hear, and they can also learn the skills like we have the packing, we have the painting and other skills. We
Yes.
can provide them. If we have the skilled labor of these children,
Yes.
they will be dignified in our society. They will be the
Absolutely.
earning point for their family, for themselves as well. They will not be burden on our
Yes,
society.
absolutely, because that's
But
something a lot of families, this is a concern that a lot of families have, is that how will a child with Down syndrome go out into the world, and what kind of support will they need? Will they be able to live quote unquote normal life? And these are concerns that all parents have for their children. But then when you have a child who is differently able, then those questions kind of take a different turn. And I'm really glad, Abid, that you brought up how in Urdu we don't have a term for Down syndrome. And that sort of brings me to the idea of language and the words that we use to describe people who are differently able. So Farzeen, I was reading up on KDSP's website also about words first. And I think that that's a really important thing to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's called people's first language.
Yes.
So what we essentially want to do is we want to put the person before the disability or the condition. We want to recognize that they are a person first, and then they might have whatever condition they might have. So when you're referring to a person with Down syndrome, you say person with Down syndrome, not a Down syndrome person, or a boy with Down syndrome, not a Down syndrome boy, because it's very essential to recognize that he is a whole person first before the condition.
And Farzeen, there's also a difference between saying down and downs also, because I think that most people tend to say downs, but it's down. That's also a kind of distinction there.
Right. So when we're also referring to, like how you said, down and downs, that's also not something that is usually used, or it's not encouraged to be used. So the person who discovered Down syndrome was John Langdon Down.
Yes.
And when we say Down's syndrome or a person with Downs, so that person does not belong to Downs, right? So there's no need to use. So it's always better to just use the whole term, Down syndrome, person with Down syndrome, boy with Down syndrome, girl with Down syndrome, right?
No, I think that is really important because community and supporting each other begins with knowing what kind of language to use. And is differently abled also all right? Because I feel like there is a conversation around that also.
Differently abled is fine to use. I think a lot of people use differently abled. I mean, it just highlights that they are different, right? Yeah. It's not a bad thing. Yes. What we do always educate people on whenever we're having our awareness sessions on Down syndrome is that we should never use the word suffer or patients of Down syndrome. That's very commonly used. Or, that girl suffers from Down syndrome. Nobody suffers from Down syndrome. Yeah. I mean, they might suffer from health related, issues related to health that come with Down syndrome, but they don't suffer from Down syndrome. I mean, people with Down syndrome can lead very happy, fulfilling lives if they're given the chance. So there's no need to attach the word suffering to it.
So Farzeen, there are a lot of myths around Down syndrome, and I wanted to kind of throw some at you and see if we can kind of unravel them together. So I think that the most common one is that older mothers that are more likely to have children who will receive a diagnosis of Down syndrome, which is not necessarily true.
Right. So the older the age of the older the mother, the higher the chances of her having a baby with Down syndrome. I think when we're looking at a mother who is 25 years old, which is when I was 25 when I had my daughter. So the chance of having a child with Down syndrome at that age is about 1 in 1,200. And as you grow older, so a woman at 35 years of age would have a chance of 1 in 300. At 45, it's 1 in 30. So the older the woman gets, the higher the chances of her having a baby with Down syndrome. But most babies with Down syndrome are born to younger mothers because younger moms are the ones who have babies, right? The greater proportion
so they have more babies.
Of women. Right. So because of that, there are more women who are younger who have babies with Down syndrome. But the probability increases as the woman grows older.
Okay, so that's an interesting paradox. And it's also because this is not necessarily a hereditary disease. It's not necessary that if one baby has Down syndrome, then its subsequent siblings will have it as well. Like, are the odds the same?
If there's... so the odds, if a woman has already had a baby with Down syndrome, then her chance of having another baby with Down syndrome is around 1 in 100. Okay. So obviously, depending on the age of the mother, it's more around the ballpark of 1 in 100 if a woman's already had a baby with Down syndrome.
Are those high odds or odds? Because I'm not good with numbers.
Yeah, so it depends on how old the mother is. So obviously, if you're 40, then that factors in. So if you're younger, if you're, for example, when I was 25, my chance was 1 in 1,200. Yeah. Right. But if so the chance of me having another baby in maybe 2-3 years after that time would have been 1 in 100, not produced.
So I think a common misconception also about children with Down syndrome is, and I'm glad that Abid also brought this up, is that people seem to think that they're intellectually just much less capable than they actually are, or that they can't go to school, or that they can't learn to read and write. And your work with KDSP clearly proves that that is not the case at all. And children with Down syndrome, of course, can go to school and are perfectly intelligent.
Right. So how we spoke about this before, that there's a spectrum, right?
Yes.
And I think that spectrum and the capability and the potential of a child with Down syndrome is very heavily determined by the support system that child has, especially in the early years, right? Right. So that's why we have a huge focus on this thing called early intervention. I think Mr. Abid also mentioned how there are all these therapies available for children with Down syndrome. Yes. So the three main ones that we need to focus on are occupational therapy, physical therapy, and speech therapy, right? And these have to start from day one. So the longer you wait.
Oh, sorry, yes. So the longer you wait, harder you have to work.
The harder you have to work, and the less, basically. So you're just basically, this is a foundation, right? You have to lay a strong foundation if you want the child to go ahead and have a bright future. And this basically early intervention, all these 3 therapies, and they lead into how easily the child can be integrated into mainstream society. Can he go to a mainstream school? So if he has a strong, if he's had good speech support early on in his years, then obviously he can be integrated very well in a mainstream society, right? So physical therapy is basically looking after or kind of strengthening the bigger muscles of the body, right? So like walking, running, jumping, riding a bike and all of that, teaching them those skills.
Like gross motor
speech
skills.
therapy is obviously related to your speech. Absolutely, gross motor skills. And occupational therapy focuses on fine motor skills. So basically, learning how to write, the small
Hold the
muscles
pencil.
in the body. Hold the pencil, buttoning up your buttons, feeding yourself, basically daily life skills. Those are included in occupational therapy.
And then do children with Down syndrome need speech therapy? Because that's also part of the sort of triad of therapies.
Absolutely. So this is because, how I mentioned, they have low muscle tone. The tongue is also a muscle, right? So when there is low muscle tone, right. The kids have difficulty kind of being able to control that properly. They need practice, right?
Yeah.
So with practice, the child will most probably go on to learn how to talk properly and be able to communicate.
Yeah. No, that's really, really heartening and really promising. And I'm so glad to hear it. We're going to take a very quick break here and we'll be back with this wonderful conversation in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the conversation that we're having about Down syndrome on the coffee table. We are talking to Farzeen Ali from the Karachi Down Syndrome Program and Abid Lashari from the Pakistan Down Syndrome Association about the wonderful work that they are also doing. And we're also going to busting myths about children with Down syndrome and their needs and how their lives can, how we can support them and help them to have productive, happy lives as productive members of society, really. So, Abid, in your work with PDSA, and you are also the president of the National Disability and Development Forum. So, what kind of support do you think that organizations like yours still need from the government, for example, or from policymakers to provide more support for differently abled people?
The Pakistan Down Syndrome Association, we have this organization, but it is not well responded by the government, even by the donors, because they don't understand what Down syndrome is there. There is no clear message of disability. But in a National Disability and Development Forum, it has the clear message that we are working on disability. But Down syndrome does not show there is a kind of disability or what is this.
Yes,
so,
yes, that's true.
We are also we were unable to win any kind of proposal for the children, for the welfare of children with Down syndrome under the banner of Pakistan Down Syndrome Association, even from government, even from decline from the donors as well.
Because they don't understand what it is.
They don't understand what Down syndrome is, what will they do. Okay, but about the National Disability and Development Forum, we applied for the grant from the government of Sindh. It was accepted, and we established this rehabilitation center under the support of government of Sindh in Nawab Shah, because they understand that there are 5 forms of disability, including Down syndrome. We have the physical disability, we have the hearing impairment, we have the visual impairment, we have the intellectual disability, and Down syndrome is the other one. And we have worked
all of these
in our
things happen.
Down syndrome from the intellectual disability, because it is a kind of another form that we can treat it as separately from the intellectual disability, and they can be easily managed and easily can be mainstream in our society. We have the speech therapy. They have the less speech in our these kind of children.
Yes.
We have the speech therapy, and this is the only free facility in Sindh after Karachi in Nawab Shah.
Excellent.
So we provide them speech therapy. Now our 1 or 2 children are able to speak. It takes time.
Yes.
It's not time. It's a taking time process. Time-taking process. And we have, this is 3rd year of our rehabilitation center, and we have only the 2 children that are able to speak. But we have also occupational therapy, then how to button up, how to wear the clothes, how to use the washroom, daily life
Those are things that help you be independent. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that this is also something that I'm curious about, and Farzeen, maybe you can help answer that, is that the needs of children with Down syndrome are presumably not the same as adults with Down syndrome. So what kind of support do people with Down syndrome need, and how does that support change as they grow older?
So, like I mentioned, early intervention is key, right?
Yeah.
As for a child with Down syndrome, right? So they'll be needing that very holistic, support system in terms of physical, occupational, and speech therapy. Along with that, they'll need a very comprehensive health and medical, overview, and everyone keeping track. Okay, have their cardiac issues been addressed? Has their hearing issues been addressed?
Yes.
Because, for example, if a child is going to school and they're not being able to hear properly or see properly, then how will they learn and how will they progress? So it's very round the clock kind of situation when a child is younger.
Yeah.
As they grow older, the good thing is that they're very, very good at they can develop their self-help skills very early on, and they can be independent that way. So I feel it's important to address that, how when someone comes across a person with Down syndrome, they might feel that, okay, yeah, their level of intellectual disability is pretty severe or very profound because they're not able to communicate. So the thing with Down syndrome is that people with Down syndrome are not able to communicate that well if they haven't gotten that support earlier on, but they can understand everything, right? So they're understanding, they're just not able to communicate. And if you're giving them alternate means of being able to communicate, they can go on to do very, very well.
Yeah. So what are those alternate forms? What are those alternate forms of communication?
Right. So there are lots of people who come to us and who have kids who are, for example, 7 years and above, right? Who haven't had much of early intervention because it's a few years, things have changed a lot. There has been a lot of awareness about, okay, these are the protocols that need to be followed as far as Down syndrome is concerned. So get your child in early for therapy. But there have been people who have missed that boat, unfortunately. And they have come to us even when their child is 14. Oh, my child cannot speak and we need speech therapy. So, I mean, at that point in time, speech therapy might not be that helpful, right? So then you have alternate means of communication. That can be sign language.
Yes. Okay.
That can be something called PECS, which is picture exchange communication. So you have like these, lots of tiny pictures. And if, for example, the person needs a sandwich, so then they, like a random example, they give you a picture of a sandwich, right? So you can communicate through that. There are obviously many, many more advanced ways of having that alternative means of communication. There, like if you use gadgets like iPads and all, so then those kind of apps
you
or
can just
programs
like tap it out
which they can. Exactly. So, and as far as adults, so as far as adults with Down syndrome are concerned, through KDSP, what we focus on is kind of allowing them to have a means by which they can lead a fulfilling and enriched life, right? And how does that happen? That happens through giving them skills, right? So they're able to become productive members of society, like you had mentioned. So we focus a lot on vocational skills, a lot of basic like educational skills. So, learning how to manage your time, learning how to manage your money. So, kind of laying the grounds for ultimate independence.
Farzeen, you mentioned a lot of people come to KDSP with older children, like 7 or even 14. So do you feel that indicates that even now there is a certain hesitancy in families when it comes to accepting a diagnosis, because from what I understand, a Down syndrome diagnosis is made very early on in a baby's life. So you know what condition the child has, but then why is there this gap then in getting the help that they need?
Right. So there's, I think, a lot of factors that kind of play in here. So the first thing would be that many people wouldn't know what the right protocol is. So, for example, as far as healthcare is concerned, when Alea was born, we got a lot of misinformation from a lot of health practitioners, right? They didn't know what was, because there was lack of awareness. That has changed a lot. I would have to give it to all of these private hospitals now. I think they're really getting onto the bandwagon of educating the professionals there. Also, yes, I think the taboo and stigma attached to the diagnosis has a lot to do with people coming forward and seeking help for their children. But I would like to believe that has changed also significantly. The people who come to us who have kids with who have older kids come to us later probably because they haven't heard of the work that we do yet, or I don't know, they've been going to other places, but we have over 1,000 kids in our network now.
Wow.
So, and we have a lot of like new kids coming in who are much younger. So what basically what we want to aim for is to get the family on board as soon as the baby is born, right?
Yes.
Because early intervention is key.
Yes.
Also to combat that stigma and taboo and the loneliness and the heartbreak that comes with a diagnosis initially, that needs to be, kind of addressed immediately too, because the faster the parents can get out of that, the more they can help their child. So basically what we do what we try to do at hospitals is for the doctors or to get permission from the families so that we can get in touch with them immediately as they receive a diagnosis, and then we can start their counseling and start their journey with them.
I think that kind of family support is such a crucial point, and I'm so glad that you raised it, because as a parent, it is a lifelong diagnosis for a child, and it's something that is, and again, because it can happen to anybody. There's no, there's nothing that you did that could cause it to happen, and it's something that you have to come to terms with. And I imagine that would be such a struggle for a parent for whom this diagnosis has just come as really a bolt from the blue.
Yeah. Unfortunately, many people are made to believe in our society that it is a fault of the mother, right? There have been so many cases in which the husbands have left their wives because they had a baby with Down syndrome, right? Or, the mothers or the parents have faced so much backlash from the family, this is a curse upon the family, and it must have been because of something you did or whatever. So, breaking all of those taboos and stigma is so essential it even comes before being able to lay that foundation for the child, because if a society is not ready to accept a child who is differently abled, then there's no point. So that's how, KDSP started as a family support group, because we felt that if we must empower parents first before we even start working with the kids, because that is where it starts, right? If the mother is strong, if the father is strong, if there is no shame, there should be no shame in being different. So that's how we started, and then we added on all the other areas of our work also.
Farzeen, do we have statistics, and do we have sort of research being done, at least for Pakistan? Because like Abid mentioned, it's really difficult for his organization, for example, to kind of explain to donors and to government agencies that Down syndrome is a condition that needs support, but it's often not seen as a sort of traditional disability kind of situation. So are we doing anything to kind of, is there some science happening? Do we have statistics for Pakistan? Where are we vis-a-vis that?
Right. So research is obviously hard to come by. here in Pakistan, but what the Aga Khan Hospital has been doing is it's launching its directory for people with Down syndrome. So that's the first step, right? Being able to identify how many people there are. And as far as donor awareness is concerned, we've had a pretty good experience with donors and being able to raise that kind of awareness. I think a lot of it comes from, so we try and say, okay, listen, don't sympathize, because people with Down syndrome don't need your pity, right? You need to empathize with them, put yourself in their shoes. Yeah, put yourself in their shoes, because they're humans just like us. I mean, obviously they're humans; they're no different. So I think playing that or kind of angling it from like that has been very helpful in bringing that relatability, right? To the cause. So yeah.
No, that's wonderful. So much, Farzeen. Thank you so much, Abid, for taking up the time, and congratulations on the wonderful work that you are doing. And thank you, more than congratulations, thank you for your invaluable work in rural and urban communities in helping to spread awareness about Down syndrome and how there are so many opportunities for kids with early intervention and family support. We can all help our kiddos have happy, fulfilled lives. And what's better than that? Thank you guys for watching. If you're watching this on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you next time on The Coffee Table. Bye now.